our third Instructional Design and Technology Roundtable. For a lot of the session this time around, we'll be kind of up here talking, but don't hesitate to interject or ask questions anywhere along the line. We like to keep this as informal as possible. We will be showing some examples of some existing courses that have been taught recently, nothing any older than this summer. So if you see something that you have a question about, or there's something that we've shown that you're not sure about or that you would like us to elaborate on, don't hesitate to just grab a hold of us and break right into the middle of it, because this is mostly for you to find out new ideas and share ideas with each other.
And if you want to share experience, something that we're talking about and you've experienced it in your class, please feel free to as well.
And I probably should introduce myself. I always forget to do that. My name is Ben Ward. I'm an instructional designer with the Office of Mediated Education.
And I'm Swasati Mukherjee. We work in the same office.
Okay. Thank you. Now this is our first one. I'll go ahead and read it for the benefit of the tape. Frustration, isolation, and miscommunication. The feedback systems currently used by many instructors are much like autopsies. Once class is over, they attempt to discern what went wrong. This process will become increasingly unacceptable as universities and corporations compete for the education of the global market. And we're seeing this becoming increasingly true since this was written. And the truth of the matter is, students are increasingly demanding some form of interaction in their courses. They want something more immediate. They want something beyond just reading textbooks and listening to lectures. And the students, honestly, who don't want these things are truthfully probably just trying to coast through. And they're not as interested in being involved in their own education. I'm always kind of hesitant to throw this up here because it's a pretty strong statement. But I think it kind of illustrates what's becoming of education now. And the message board as a tool is truthfully my favorite answer for this. It's very immediate, it's very easy to use. It is available in a variety of learning management systems. It can be standalone. But the neat thing is it provides a place for students to meet on their own time and take responsibility for their own communication and their own education.
Okay, so let's start with some basic strategies that you should consider when using the message board. Well, when you start off teaching in a course, you want to be able to set the ground rules for your students. What exactly are you expecting them to do? How many times you're expecting them to respond to a message board, and the kinds of postings you're expecting. So it's a good idea to start off by setting up some ground rules. The message board can be used in various ways, and we're going to talk about a lot of those ways today. But you don't have to use each one of them in your course. You could use it, maybe perhaps you could use one, or you could use several ways, several methods and use the message board in that. And I'll explain. You could use it to introduce the class to each other. If this is a completely distance course, you might not see your students at all, and you might want them to get to know each other better. You could have an introductory activity, and what that is you could say, come into class and explain who you are, talk a little bit about yourself, and get to know others as well. You can leave it open-ended, and you can have questions. It could be a place where if you ever realize in a course that, there's a common area that all the students are having a problem, maybe you could use it to answer the questions. Instead of going and emailing every student the same response, you could use it as a forum to answer everybody's questions in the course or in the class. Also, the fact that providing time, what that means is that if you see that students are responding to a question, or they're kind of going off track of the question, and maybe they're not really understanding the content that you want them to, don't leave it open completely for very long, or don't respond to it like immediately, like they have a question or they're having a problem. You don't want to respond immediately saying, I think that you should go back in and this is the right answer, or go read this chapter again. Sometimes you could just leave it open for students to just respond to each other. The idea with the message board is to allow students to interact with each other, and the instructor should be more of a facilitator to see that the discussion is going in the right direction, that it's not derogatory to students, to other students, so you want to observe them as well. You want to kind of create an environment where students feel in the message board that they are able to communicate with each other freely and openly on the subject. You don't want to get them to feel that they're restricted and they can't discuss and be open with their ideas, as long as it's related to the subject. Like I said, instructors should be facilitating rather than posting to each comment to a student's response. The idea should be to make it learner-centered as possible, so that students don't feel like this is a forum for students. Students shouldn't feel that it's a forum for instructors, but more for a forum for students to share their ideas. So those are some of the basic things you should cover. Okay, another thing along with the rules is to set out some netiquette rules. And what this is like, if you want to let them know what the rules are, how many times they should respond, what kind of behavior are you expecting them to, have. Should they be using cap locks? Using cap locks in a message board is like screaming to others. Try to warn students not to make humorous jokes, because sometimes you have diverse students and they might not understand that joke, and they might think, oh, maybe somebody's blaming me or accusing me of something. So you want to make sure that students understand that, and that they address when they respond in a message board that it's not, abusive to anyone, or it doesn't insult anyone. You also want, as an instructor, maybe share your expectations with them by responding in the message board, having an example for them, so that students can see how they're expected to respond as well. What kind of response length, the types of responses do you want them to share, examples of like other journals, other sources. So modeling your behavior for your students is always a good idea. A lot of times we have students in the course who've never used the message board and they really don't know where to start. So having an example kind of helps. At least when I was when I did my grad school education and I was expected to do the message board the first time, I had no idea what to do. And coming from a background with no technology, and then getting to my master's degree here, and then I'm like, oh, I have to do an online course. I don't know what to do. And, I never met the instructor. We never went to class. And the syllabus said, oh, you have to go to the message board and do your posting for this week. Well, I've never used a message board, so I had no idea. But then having the example in the course really helped me, because I looked at it and I thought, okay, well, I know what she's expecting you to say. And then having other students, I was probably the last one to post in the course, because I was waiting for everybody else to post so I could see what they say. And people had huge, explanations about something, and I barely had 2 lines to say. So it takes a while, and having an example really helps your students. Another thing is having a grading rubric. And what that does is it allows students to see what kind of response you're expecting them. Are you going to take marks off for the fact that they're going to have grammar mistakes? What kind of content are you looking for? Sometimes instructors like to have a rubric saying that, if you just come into the message board and say, oh, I agree, well, that's not going to give you anything. I need more than that. So they have a rubric. You could have a rubric saying scale from 1 to 5. If you say I agree, you get 0 or 1. And then if you make if you contribute to the discussion board something meaningful, maybe you get 4 or 5. So you kind of lay out how you're going to grade them. Another idea with grading rubric is to kind of set out how many times you're expecting them to respond in the message board, and then based on that you tell them throughout the semester, the number of times you respond to the message board, this is the number of points you're going to get. And it doesn't have to be based on, somebody has responded 10 times so they get extra points. It should be the content. The idea of grading them should be on the response in the message board rather than the number of times they've actually responded. Response time policies are very, very good idea too, because when you post to the message board, you kind of want the students, at least from when I was a student, my perspective was, I would like to know when you're going to look at that message board. When are you going to get the chance to look at it as an instructor, read it, and tell me what do you think of my comments, or do you think, you know, it's out of line totally. Most of the times when you respond as, you know, as a student, somebody will correct you if you're wrong in a class. Students will just jump right back to you and say, well, I don't think so. This is what I think. So having a kind of response time when you've got a message board and you're using it throughout the semester in your course is to say, well, you know, at the end of this week, I'm going to get back to you. So maybe you have a thread running for a whole week, Monday to Friday, and as an instructor, you look at it at the end of the week. It doesn't have to be that way. You could set your own schedule. If midweek works for you, then you could set it up that way simply. But letting your students know the turnaround time for you to respond is really helpful.
Okay. It's probably a really good idea to review some of the common pitfalls, because there are some traps you can fall into while using a message board. One of the first and foremost ones that happens with people who use a message board the first time through, who are novice to the whole pedagogy behind it, is replying to every posting. This is probably the quickest way to kill conversation in a course. The students never really will establish a feeling of ownership of the actual threads or conversations going on. So it's a good idea to be a little heavy-handed at first, to be encouraging, to give examples, to model how you want them to respond to questions so they have an idea of what your expectations are. But as quickly as you can, start pulling back from there. It's a very, very important thing to do. The absence of deadlines. I've seen a few courses, I'll be entirely honest, that have successfully worked without any requirements in terms of deadlines or point values for postings. But these are rare. They're kind of few and far between. Most students, especially at the undergraduate level, need some kind of impetus to force them to take the time, even if it's 1 or 2 points, to take the time and make the post, to read their peers' postings. Otherwise, what will happen is they'll just kind of keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And you'll have a message board with your initial post in there, and maybe another one that follows up with, like, hey, where is everybody? And that's it. You'll be done. It won't go anywhere. But even if you put a few points in there, then they're going to go in there. They're going to have some kind of reward and return for it. Also, if you put in deadlines in terms of when posting is supposed to be expected, and you have to realistically expect that the students are going to wait to the last moment. If you put a deadline as Sunday, you're going to have posts coming in at midnight. It's going to happen, and it'll be up to a third or a quarter of the class sometimes, truthfully. On the flip side, you'll have some students who will post the moment they are allowed to, just because they want to get out there and have a chance to say the best things first. Because as you get later and later in the week, it becomes more and more difficult to generate more original ideas when you're in a conversation online. Insufficient wait time, and I know we're kind of reiterating some of these points, but some of these are very important. For a message board to work, it really needs to be a common place where students meet and feel comfortable in there. And one of the ways to establish this is to just literally kind of hold off. I had a former colleague who used to teach Introduction to British Literature online, and he was always amazed, and the more and more he taught online, the higher and higher his reviews got, and the less they actually mentioned his name ever. And he thought it was hilarious. And it was terrible for him, because what would happen is some student would post something that was just wholly erroneous and totally off base. It was about the topic, but they missed the point entirely. And his entire teaching fiber required him to go and type in a response, but he'd hold off. And usually within 24 or 48 hours, one of the student's peers would come forward and say, have you ever thought of looking at it this way? And before the end of the week, they would actually all be back on track, having done it on their own. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are times where students never do quite get it right, and it really is your job to step in and say, hey, let's look at it from this angle, and rephrase and clarify, because they may just be missing something along the line. But if at all they can discover it on their own, it becomes a lot more meaningful for them as a learning experience. Requiring too much. I've personally been victimized by this one. You really have to understand what your goals are in your message board. If you're requiring them to basically post a paper and then have their peers critique it and such, that's one thing, and that's great. But if you're trying to generate a conversation or a discussion, if you start requiring things like, citations, or playing roles and doing citations and all at the same time, eventually you can have so many requirements on the student, individual postings, that you kill all the life in the process. There's no excitement involved. They're so busy meeting the criteria that they never ever enjoy what they're doing. And I was in a research course once that, truthfully, everyone in the course did the bare minimum postings. They were accurate and they were wonderful and they were well placed postings, but the truth of the matter was it was a lifeless message board because no one wanted to fight through to do that in addition to everything else. And the last one, the one you really have to be prepared for, the reason you want to have a netiquette policy to fall back on in your course is flaming. It's really easy, without all the communication cues that we're used to in the face-to-face conversation, for things to become misinterpreted and for students to begin literally fighting online. Or you might make some kind of comment to you that seems funny or sarcastic, or be careful, because you're way in trouble before you know it. Especially things like sarcasm never really translate well to the written word, at least for many people. So the moment you see something where you get the incidents where they're firing back hostile messages, shut it down, intervene. Block the message board if you have to. Start deleting things. But immediately get a hold of those students and explain to them that that behavior is just absolutely not allowed. You can't allow it to work itself out, because often it won't. It'll just escalate. So be quick when that begins to happen. I like to throw these up. They're actually from Building Online Communities in Cyberspace, I think believes the title of the book. I quoted, put it in your handout there. The second handout is by Paloff and Pratt. They actually have these 6 points, and they're really big into this whole idea of generating a community of learners. And if you've had any real time starting to work with online courses and so forth, you probably have caught that catchphrase of community of practice and so forth. Well, they kind of put these up there as kind of ideals that we should all strive for if we really want the students to start taking ownership of their own learning. And we really want them to feel like it's a safe place to learn, and that everybody needs to be involved, that no one really has the right to just sit back in the corners. So we start with things like honesty. And that's really deadly important, because even when I was a grade school teacher, I'll be the first to tell you, if you are even a little off kilter in a statement, students will call you on that. Sooner or later, one way or another. The nice ones email you, the others just drop it right on the board for everybody to read. Be responsive. If you aren't responsive, they're not going to feel the need to be responsive. The message always comes from the top and trickles down. So how you respond on there, if you're just responding to messages in kind of a license plate speak, you're in trouble, because that's what they're going to start doing in turn. Keep it relevant. If you don't do that, you'll lose focus, and your discussion will become kind of just a place to chat, and that's kind of the antithesis of where we want to head a discussion board. Be respectful, and this is not only to all the students but to yourself. It's really important that you keep a tone that's very professional but friendly. Be open, that's fairly obvious. And the last one is empowerment. And this is the one I really like to catch on. if you don't give your students a chance to step up to the line, if you don't have expectations of them, they're never going to be empowered to learn anything. They're just going to memorize stuff and regurgitate it. So give them a chance and give them the opportunity, create the situations where they have to take responsibility for their own learning, and then let them do it. Step back and let them make mistakes, let them correct themselves, but let them get in there and do it. Otherwise, you're never going to start developing kind of a community feel online. And I'll be entirely honest, having taken slews of online courses, an empowered message board is a wonderful experience. And there aren't many things that are parallel to it in truth in a face-to-face course. There are some situations that will happen periodically through a semester, but not anything that has that kind of lasting feeling of permanence that a message board can. Because you're publishing something to the web, and everybody can see it, and nobody can hide in the corners. And that's really a nice feeling. We mentioned right off the beginning about introductions, and we'll probably show an example right here. We have an example from Dr. Retzoff over in Food Science Institute. We also have some examples from Dr. Cantor, Deb Cantor, from Human Ecology. And both of them,
Which one do you want to see first?
either will do, because both of them use it. Why don't you just go ahead and open up the archives, you'll have to.
Okay. Sorry.
And I believe they, yes. Class introductions, possible, so why don't we go ahead and click on that. If you're teaching purely at a distance, this is important to have an introductory activity, because otherwise everybody's just a number. It may be a name, but unless you've met them in person, they have no identity. They really don't. So you kind of want to, why don't we just go ahead and click on the first one. And she actually uses her board for several things at once, so it's kind of nice. But if people get to know each other, then they start having a vested interest in talking to each other. And this can be really an important thing. And truthfully, it has saved me in the past. I remember once I was getting towards the end of a semester and running out of steam. Part of the reason was just because the class didn't ever have steam, and I was just tired. It was my last semester in graduate school, and I was done. And my grade was starting to cascade downward. I wasn't saved by the instructor. The instructor never even talked to me. I probably would have gotten a C or worse in that course. But peers on the message board and through email are what pulled me back in. And that can happen. You know, you can really have them start supporting each other, and they get to know each other. A lot of the relationships I have with former students I went to school with were all evolved on message boards, taking several classes together. You might actually want to go over to Deanna's course, because her introductions are a little more aggressive.
Oops. Wrong one.
I always hate touchpads. They always feel such a disconnect.
That is her course, right? 370?
Are you in the right course?
That's what I'm asking you. Yes.
I know. You're not. You're supposed to be
307.
307.
Oops.
We had a little transposition. We'll hop in there. Yes.
Is the chat room about the same thing as a message board, or is that just something during a specified time that you try and
There's a
make more of a...
big difference between them. There's a difference in the whole character between the two tools. The message board is really neat because it's asynchronous, and people have time to think and compose ideas. And this is really wonderful for students who are shy and normally hide out in the corners. And it kind of is a great equalizer. And it builds up over time, and they all come to a central place, and they can see what everybody else has posted. The chat room, on the other hand, is synchronous. And you literally, it's like instant messaging. You're firing back clips and phrases back and forth, and he who can type the fastest wins, truthfully. And if you get more than even 5 or 8 people in a chat room, the conversation starts getting kind of schizophrenic feel to it, because everybody's messages are showing up at different rates, and several threads of discussion can actually start materializing in the middle of all of it. And truthfully, it's not as effective. Now, I've seen ways in which to use the two in tandem that are very powerful. One of the best examples I have for that is that I know of an instructor who classically, in every class that she has, will set up an interview that's going to happen in the chat room. But she'll post it on the message board and have all the students come up with questions for their guest. And then they'll all meet together at one time, and she'll post out the questions, and the interviewer will begin to respond to it. And the guest will begin to respond to it, and they will have had time to prepare. And then the students will kind of add to it, and they'll elaborate further and further. And then the instructor comes back in and herds them all back together, back to the central point, and they begin with the next question. Otherwise, I've seen chat sessions that just literally have digressed to the point that they're not talking about anything anymore. They're just literally chatting. It's not as strong a tool, the chat room isn't. It can be used well, and it's immediate. But the message board is one of those truly wonderful tools. That first link right in there, personal info. And she actually has them all starting up individual threads, except towards the end, some responded to a comment she had made in there. Now, a lot of what we're showing here is graduate level courses, and truthfully, I'm kind of at a mixed feeling about this. Graduate students are great on message boards because they're there, they're focused, they have a purpose. And if you ask them of it, they expect that this is what's to be done. Undergraduates, it can be a mixed bag. You can get a whole slew of freshmen in, and it can be a struggle at first. It really, really can, until they get an idea of what's expected of them. But as long as you lead by example, you can get them all online and doing what they need to do.
I was saying here are some more personal introductions.
Yeah. And these are all very straightforward and very simple. Some classes will actually ask you to respond and ask questions of students. So I have students ask other students questions so they get to know them even yet better. Why don't we go ahead and slip back to more about alternative uses. Critiques and peer reviews. This is really actually a fairly fun use. I know of several composition classes that work entirely by this method. They'll set up a thread for each small group of students, 2 or 3 or 4 students, depending on how the class breaks up. And the students will post their paper. And then their peers will go through and read them and offer up suggestions. And of course, the instructor will go in and actually grade them not only on their initial draft, but also will grade their peers on having meaningful suggestions for improving papers. So it kind of gets everybody involved in the process, it documents it well, and then they can rewrite the paper and submit the final paper to the instructor. You can use this for critiques of, I've seen websites, products, all sorts of things along this line. Journals, weblogs, or even blogs, these are wonderful opportunities. You dedicate either a board or a thread to one student, and that's where they write their observations and thoughts. And some of these you'll have as a closed thread, whether you enforce that or not, it's up to you, but where it's always their responses all the way through. And other times you can open it up so students can feed off of each other's comments, and the journals become richer. Deb Cantor actually,
You want to
once
show
we
that again?
flip over that.
It's gonna take a minute again.
720.
Yeah, it's not open.
Uh-huh.
So if they have a paper that they're, how do they upload that, or they copy and paste it? Or?
They can copy and paste it, or you can upload it as a file attachment. Both choices are available.
They can do that?
And both work well. If you're having them upload file attachments, you might want to put in somewhere in your syllabus or in the assignment some basic explanations of things they want to do. in case of file incompatibility, you know, like saving your Word documents out as an RTF or such, so that if you have people who are like using Mac or who don't have Word or who are using WordPerfect, they can all open up the same document. Because that kind of cross-platform, cross-software issue will arise when they start trading documents back and forth.
I see. Is this in the tutorial on the online for that
Oh.
information? Will that be?
I don't think it actually is about saving out as a rich text format. But anytime you want to, I'll walk you through it. It's real quick. Once you've done it once, you can do it a million times. It's just a different save option.
I'm going to click on this one.
Okay. And Deb Cantor actually runs her class on journals and a good portion of her class, not the entire class,
It's
but
really
a good
long.
portion of them. And so the expectations run accordingly. These are huge statements. It's a graduate level course. And they'll even reply as they add thoughts later on to their own postings. And so it becomes a progressive set of entries as they communicate back and forth and learn new details and read other people's entries. And so they can become quite involved. And as you'll see, they obviously have their own ownership. And mind you, this is only technically one set of entries for each student for a particular module. If you go through your entire class, they're doing it through the entire semester. So there's a lot of effort in there. And you can really
Well, this
drive
is
a lot of
this is an
communication.
example of where they send in her posting. Each student send in their posting to Deb, and she posts it out on the message board, and then each student goes back in and responds to each student. So as you can see, the top one, here's the students who respond to this Daniel Olson's posting, and then the next one is they post to Summer Muller's posting. So she's kind of broken it down. Basically, the students have not posted this on the message board. They've actually sent it to Deb Cantor, and she's posted it out for them.
Oh.
So
So she's kind of got an involved process going there. So it's really nice. Why don't we go ahead and step on to the next one. Group projects are wonderful, especially if you can have a grouping feature that will allow them to have their own message board. This way, as an instructor, you can dip in and see their conversation back and forth and see who's carrying their load and who is not. It creates a record for the whole process, and it also gives them a place to centralize everything. This is really important in distance courses because everybody's schedules are different, and a lot of reasons students take distance courses is so they can fit it into a very busy lifestyle. And a tool like this can make the difference between them actually being able to meaningfully interact together and do something as a group, or not being able to at all, and one student does the bulk of the work and then someone edits it and the third one just puts their name on it and posts it. And that'll happen a lot in distance courses unless you provide them some avenue. It can be repositories for shared information. I recently saw a board where actually they went out and each student was responsible for looking up a different piece of equipment and finding out specs on it and prices and so forth, and then they'd all post it and share it together. And finally, we shouldn't discount this, and it's kind of forward thinking, but a lot of instructors, well, not a lot, some instructors will put out a place for students just to get to know each other and to socialize. And the rationale behind this is in a face-to-face class, students at any given time can walk out your door after lecture and talk to each other and get to know each other, and are, as a consequence, more vested in the social experience of learning. If we don't have that door to walk out of, then there isn't a place like that. And the downside is especially students who are very technologically apt will go and find a place like that anyway. And they'll start emailing back and forth or chatting with their peers back and forth anyway. If you provide a place, at least you have some idea of what they're talking about. But if you don't, they're going to do it. Some of the students will do it anyway. So I always believe in it. You might as well sanction having a place to talk to each other as peers.
Isn't that kind of a key difference, though? I mean, if you walk out the door, I don't hear what they're saying, and they probably prefer it that way.
And if they're going to behave that way, they'll do it anyway. They'll email each other and they'll IM each other. But if you give them a place where they can just be social, then there's a good possibility they're not going to make the effort to IM each other and email each other. They're going to feel like, well, here's a place and we can just chat about, you know, the problems I had at work today, and this made this getting this assignment done difficult, and all that kinds of things. And I know we don't normally think of the kind of soft, touchy-feely aspects of teaching, but when we start getting so invested into technology, I think it's important to pause a moment and start reconsidering them. Because working through the computer screen, to a degree, as the first slide said, it isolates people. It increases opportunities for miscommunication. And you have to work against these things, or otherwise students get very frustrated. So if you can give them, you know, some human space, it can have some rewards. Now, if you have a class that's freshmen and they may not be mature enough to deal with it, then by all means, don't even put it out there for them. But if you have graduate students who are, you know, hunting for jobs and so forth, and they're really sharing, you know, their professional life back and forth, then they will be happy that that's there, because that'll help everybody.
And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that are available in the message board. You can archive your message board, you can archive certain threads, and we showed in our example from both the courses that instructors, when the message board gets really long, then you can almost archive and, you know, put it away for students to come back and look at it. And in that way, it reduces space and the length of the message board, so that when students do come into the message board, they don't have to scroll down several pages to get to the post that they want to read. So you can, throughout this course, throughout the semester, you can archive threads and put them away in a different folder, kind of like, and then have your regular current thread related for that week going on. You can find all kinds of statistics with the message board. You can find out per thread, you can find out statistics by message board. If you have more than one message board, you could find out how many times students have posted. You can find statistics by number of students, number of threads, number of postings, words, and all kind of details. You can also sort your message board by author and date and time. If you wanted to find out how many times one student has posted, you can just go and click on the author and find out how many times they've posted, and it sorts it out actually. You can do the same thing with dates. You want to find out the most recent postings. You can click on that and it will generate the most current dates sorted out. You can also search for keywords in the message board. If you have a really long thread and you're looking for one particular, one particular word or one particular topic that's relevant to a thread, and you don't want to spend time clicking on each one of them, you could do a search and you could find out, make it easier for yourself. Sticky threads are a way of kind of making a thread stick right at the top of the message board. If you didn't have time to archive, or if you felt that your thread was getting really long and you didn't want students to go all the way down, scroll all the way down to read the most recent messages, because they're in bold usually when they're new, what you could do is you could take that thread and make it sticky, and what it'll do is it'll stick right at the top of your message board. So that way when students log into the message board, it's right on the top and they don't have to search. They don't have excuses like, oh, I didn't find it. You know, it's right there staring at your face. You can also lock a thread if you feel that, you know, students have responded way too much on this and you want them to move on. They still want to keep on posting, but as an instructor you feel that, well, they need to move on and maybe talk about something else or move to the next thread. You could lock a thread. You could also lock the whole entire message board, I think, can't you? So what that does is it prevents from further postings. Also, if you feel that students are not responding in terms of content, but are saying other flaming stuff, then you could also lock the thread down in that case. You can also do file attachments. If you have like English courses, for example, you've done a paper and you think it's really long and you don't want to paste it, into the message board, you could just do a file attachment. Maybe you want to share articles, maybe you found a PDF article somewhere on the web and you want to share it because it's pertaining to that week's thread or that course, then you could add that as well. So those are some of the features that most message boards offer, whatever system you use. I know that we offer most of these for K-State Online.
I think that's where we're at. We're going to open it up for questions if anybody has some. I could warn you of some things, like don't ever suggest that your grade's dependent on how many posts you make. That'll cost you every time. It'll bury you in so many postings you won't know where daylight is.
So for a large class,
Mm-hmm.
would you break it into small groups then?
By all means, I really, really would break it into small groups. And in fact, it wouldn't even be a bad idea to assign one student in that group as kind of the unofficial monitor to let you know if something's kind of going off base or off kilter. It'll probably never crop up, but you know, especially at the undergraduate level, that's something you might want to consider as a safeguard.
And if you're really using it throughout the semester, you could even have students within the group change roles as being the leader or the moderator.
And that works out fairly well, truthfully. But I would break it into groups if you have a very large class. If you're pushing more than 20 or so students in the online environment, that starts to become a tedious task, truthfully. And or as I said, you know, like I alluded to, if you suggest more posts or longer posts, sometimes that'll get you in a lot of trouble. And I know of a team taught course between two colleges at the graduate level. It was a PhD course where these two instructors had implied, they hadn't actually said, implied that the more you posted, the higher your grade would be. And they never got control of the course ever again from that point on. They were sometimes seeing upwards towards, and then, mind you, there was only about 22 students in the course, but they were seeing upwards towards 100 posts a day sometimes. And it's just unbelievable. You get the right mix of ambitious students, and you're going to need to herd them back again, or you can find yourself facing the opposite problem that most people do, which is that the board never took off. So I would specify, I make groups, maybe have moderate, specify length. Don't let someone
Expectations.
publish a book, you know, shoot for 300, 500 words, make it meaningful, that kind of an expectation. Any other questions?
You mentioned the problem of later in the week there's nothing very original to say, and some students just wait until all the good stuff has been said, and then they just paraphrase.
Yes.
Is there any way around that?
Well, one way to do it, and it's kind of a mechanical way, is to structure up responses in a tighter deadline. And that's kind of a catch-22. But if you give them only like 3 days, then they're all going to start firing off things faster. And then if they have to respond back to each other within 2, and then again in 2, then you're going to get a tighter loop, and then people aren't, those first ambitious, the students who we all have grown to hate or were one of, or love, the ones who are, oh, I can post now, and they post their book the moment they get a chance so that nobody else has anything to say. They're not going to have as much time to turn around and do that. I've heard of instances and have known of instances where instructors have actually addressed certain students and said, hey, hold back a little, let other people have a voice too. And oddly, this mix has no relationship to how verbose they might be in a face-to-face class, because it may be the person who never talks that's always writing herd on top of everybody else in the message board. The other thing is you can break the topic up, and you can assign some of them to address a certain part of the question or a certain part of the topic, and have other 2 or 3 students address another part of it, and then kind of use it as like an expert group where everybody takes their pieces and remelds them into a grand picture, which gives you grand opportunity later to come and redress that and have some synthesis where people will tie the pieces and parts together.
But I think it requires a little bit more time
Yeah.
to allocate towards all this, because since you're breaking it up into smaller groups and then coming back to Form 1, I think you probably should allocate a little bit more time for yourself than rather than just the regular contributing to the message board within a week and then you get back.
It depends on how your subject matter works, how you feel comfortable with it. You've done lots of group work. You have no fear.
I know something, it doesn't address all the problems, but I use message board in my class when I teach a humanities class, and we look at a lot of different authors. And I have them respond periodically, but it's not a response that can be duplicated very easily because I ask them to make personal connections. For example, I teach Marx, and when we talk about class structure, I ask them to kind of talk about their own family class structure and how that's affected them. So the kind of topic-specific, student-specific questions on there. I rarely use my message board in ways in which students could just agree with the information, because that's what I found every time I used it. So it's more of a chance for them to make personal connections. It just can't be repeated very easily. So I know that doesn't apply to everything,
But it's a great
Good
solution.
idea, yeah.
It's a great solution. Yes.
I think sometimes the rubric helps alleviate some of those issues too, is to have a good rubric. This past summer I really liked what I did with my message board, and I would post the material on a specific day, and then groups of students would have to develop the questions for the rest of the students, and that was so effective because it took me out of the loop, and all I was doing was kind of reading and monitoring. And the rubric said they had to be high-end, critical thought through questions, and I thought it was very effective.
And I agree, that's a wonderful use of it. Yes.
So I'll share some of the combinations that you've already said too, that I use mine. Mine is actually a course on computer skills, which using a message board is one of those things. So I use a discussion question each week in which they've got a short-term requirement to give a response to my PQ. Then they also have a requirement to reply or comment on 2 of their classmates' postings by a certain date. And then I post a summary to kind of pull everybody back to get, I've read this. They need to go and reply to that to kind of close that loop. It ties up the short time frame. There's points for each part of that response so that there's incentive to get each part of it done. And just keeps that same cycle each week to week.
And that's a great structure.
One more comment. Shasti and we're taking this online listserv course. I think we are.
Oh,
And it's very, very interesting. But one thing it made me think about is students with disabilities. They have a very difficult time with chat rooms, and a message board gives them time to post things on the message board, whereas in a chat room they don't type as quickly. So it really made me think about it's a good use of the tool as long as it's meeting the objectives I want to.
Can I add to that? If
Sure.
I'm in that same class, if you're using a listserv, stop. They're great for sending out notices to special interest groups or that kind of thing. But if you're trying to teach through a listserv, that is a hideous experience. It is disorganized. It clogs up mailboxes. It's old technology in a lot of ways, and it is high time if you're an instructor and you're still clinging to it, let it go, please, for everybody involved. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Feel free to contact us if you have an idea or a thought or a question that occurred to you later. We hope to join you again next semester. We'll probably be offering at least another 4 more sessions.
And let us know if you are interested in any topics. I mean, we have some things lined up for next year, but if you're interested in learning about something specific, let us know.
Please.
Tell us what you have in mind.
Thank you. Actually, about some very wonderful things, and actually one of my fields of expertise is instructional game development. So it would be a lot of fun if you want to see the kind of high-end, a lot of effort involved to make a unique experience. This is the kind of stuff to come and watch. Does anybody have any other ideas they might want to throw out just informally, or don't hesitate to email us if it occurs to you down the week.